these plates of mail, these protections that they got, these excuses we might call them. And sometimes when we go out witnessing, people will throw up such a barrage of excuses that they literally wear us down. What they try to do is to get us to chase their excuse. Jesus was excellent at bypassing the excuse. Remember the story of the woman at the well. He comes, he sits down, he's tired, he sends the disciples off into the city. The disciples all go off, he's sitting there at a well. It just so happens to be a well where this lady needs to come and get her water. Gee, what a coincidence that he had to choose that spot. Oh, lucky deal for him. And so the lady comes with her water pot when no one's around because she's a woman of some reputation and she isn't going to come when the rest of the women are out there, and the rest of the women aren't going to let her come when their men are out there. And so she finally sees no one is there except for this Jewish guy. Being a Samaritan, one of these folks here now called Samaritans, and these folks down here having nothing to do with the Samaritans, she thought she was pretty safe. She gets down there, and Jesus says to her, "Why don't you give me a drink of water?" And she says, "What are you doing talking to me? You're a Jew." Well, if you knew who I was, you would ask of me living water. And right away she says, "Well, you Jews say we're supposed to worship in Jerusalem, but we say we're supposed to worship up over here." Jesus didn't even pay any attention to that. Now see, it would have been easy to say, well, you don't have to anymore. You know, God's, and he could have went on to give some discourse about it, but he didn't. He kept her on that idea of water. So she comes back to his statement and says, "How can you get water for me? The well is deep." If you knew who I was. Well, we know that Messiah someday is coming. I'm him. He didn't chase the rabbit she put out there. He didn't listen to that clanking of her armor when she said, "You say we're..." No, I didn't say that. You made that up. Sometimes what you have to remember is when you're trying to deal with people's souls, don't deal with their sin issue. Don't deal with their religion. They'll throw, "Oh, well, I'm of a different religion." Well, our church believes. That's fine. I'm not talking about your church. I'm talking about Jesus. You believe in Jesus? Yeah. Well, this is what he said. You believe that Jesus Christ is God? This is what he said. Keep them away from their religion. Keep them. See, when I first got saved, October 3rd, Tennessee, 1971, I kept trying to go. And the preacher was smarter than me. He must have took lessons from Jesus, because he said, very quickly he came to me and he said, "Let me ask you this question. Who died on the cross? A church or a man?" That erased my church out of the rest of my arguments were all gone now. Because now I was having to deal with this man. He bypassed all my religious upbringing, all my religious theology. He bypassed all of it by taking me to the man. And that's what's important that you remember. When you're talking to people about Jesus, keep it to Jesus. That's what I see when I'm studying this. You have to have what the Bible refers to as a discerning spirit. That is, you have to know that people are trying to lead you down a path. You can't go there. Keep bringing them back. People would sit there and they say, "Well, I remember," and it was quite the common one. I remember I was witnessing to this fellow once, and he'd say, "Well, let me ask you this." And when you're trying to witness, they always want to ask you all these good Bible questions. And so he said, "Well, where did Cain get his life?" You know, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. And I'd be more than happy to answer that as soon as we... Because you're going to find out once people get saved, usually most of the dumb questions they thought of aren't that important once they get saved. And so usually I say, that's a good question, I'm glad you asked it. And then, but we'll talk about that once we finish. And keep them on target, keep them on target, keep them on target. Talk about Jesus Christ, period. Don't have to talk about my life, don't have to talk about their life, have to talk about the life of Jesus Christ. And keep them on that point. But if you ask them the question, which was asked of me, if you died today, if you had asked me, was I a Christian, I would have said yes. I'm a Catholic. And then you have to sit there and tell me that I'm not one. But if you ask me the question, if I died today, do I know for sure I'd go to heaven? I didn't know that. I didn't think anybody could know. That's why the question I like to ask people is, if you died today, do you know for sure you'd go to heaven? It gets the best response and comes the closest to making them answer the truth.